So I just sat down and watched the 4-hour cut of the Snyder Cut. And I was very surprised by how much I liked it. But I don't know if I would recommend it to just anyone. I think it's a harder... it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think this film has a lot of caveats connected based on how you feel about the whole DC universe as a whole, and then there's also people just complaining about how long it is, which it is split into 6 parts, so it's not really any different to just binging a season of a TV show, in my opinion. But for some reason, the 4-hour time stamp has got a lot of people very hesitant. I was curious to watch it, mostly because this is sort of the biggest example I can think of, or maybe one of the only examples I can think of, where we're getting like 2 different versions of the same movie that are actually different versions, not like a George Lucas or a Ridley Scott Blade Runner re-edit, re-release, or the Star Wars special editions. This is actually significantly different. It's not just, I went back in and I added this little scene that we deleted, or I removed this voiceover, or I added this little CGI crappy monster in the background that looks like garbage and ages the film worse than when it released. This I didn't really enjoy the theatrical Whedon cut, as people are calling it, of the Justice League. I found it pretty boring. I wasn't particularly invested or interested. I watched it while playing a game alongside. I was just like, I'll chuck it on and whatever. And you could say, oh, that's not a fair criticism of a movie if you're only watching it on the background and not really paying attention, so you're not properly experiencing it. But I feel like that's enough of a damning statement that if I wasn't interested enough to pay full attention, that there was something wrong with it in the first place. Because I was surprised that I sort of did the same. I had the same plan with the Snyder Cut. I thought it's 4 hours. I'll probably watch it in the chunks that it's broken up into. There's title cards that say part 1 through 6. And I'll chuck a game on that isn't story heavy, that doesn't need a lot of sounds or whatever. I'll turn the volume down on that. And I started watching it, and I realized that I was about an hour and a half in before remembering I was going to turn a game on, but I haven't sat down on my couch. I'm still at my computer desk watching it. And so that's more than I can say for the original one. So I did enjoy it overall a lot more. But it's kind of tricky to really put my finger on whether it was I actually enjoyed it as a movie or as the historical event of finally getting to see this kind of thing. More and more recently, we hear about movies being made by committee and getting heavily reworked on the cutting room floor. Reshoots have always been a thing in movies, even though that today, whenever there's reports of movies getting reshoots, people fear the worst and assume all of these things. But the first Predator got reshoots, and that was just a normal thing. They planned for it in the production to begin with, that they were we'll shoot the majority, we'll do the editing, the rough cut, and then after the fact, we've got this many days with a budget, so that if there's anything that we find when we get into the editing room that we think it needed, we can go back and shoot some extra scenes. But this kind of thing is very different when it comes to this movie and the Fantastic Four second reboot, or the second iteration of the Fantastic Four, and Suicide Squad. It seems like they're the ones that are, in terms of superhero movies, the closest in this period of time that are like used as an example. And it was very interesting seeing the vast contrast between the scenes that were reshot with Whedon that were tried to like lighten up the tone and visuals and try and kind of make it into something that it wasn't originally planned to be. And then as this is being billed as, it's the fans have been campaigning for years and years, released the Snyder Cut. This is supposedly Zack Snyder's original vision for the film, but it's kind of hard to know for sure that this is exactly originally what was planned, because there was more things shot for it. I believe it was like 70 million that he got given to go back and do reshoots and finish editing and finish visual effects and all sorts of things. So there's definitely a difference in tone. It's very obvious that they're going for different things here. But what was very surprising about Snyder's tone is that it is a lot less dark and grim than Batman vs Superman, which is good because I hated that film. I didn't enjoy it really hardly at all. But say like one or two scenes that was like, oh, that's cool, that looks good, but not actually enjoying it. It feels like he was sort of already course correcting himself a little bit, or like listening to the feedback and going, okay, let's pull it back a little bit, keep it dark and whatever to be consistent-ish, but what we get in this version is a lot less dark and grim. There are like little lighthearted moments. There's little kind of jokes. They're not super funny, but all of the Joss Whedon jokes that were reshot to add like much more humor, they all fail like dismally and are pathetic. I think, yeah, overall, it's very obvious that you can tell that, like, okay, this movie was made to feel this way from the beginning, and so it just works naturally better how it was originally planned than what the cinematic cut is, which is we shot most of it like this. Now we've got a different director and the studio mandates, let's go in and we want it just to be 2 hours and we want it to be like this and that and so on. And I think there's so often the most basic redundant thing that people can notice the difference between DC and Marvel movies is, oh, Marvel movies are lighthearted tone and everybody likes them, and the DC movies are dark, and so people don't like them. So it felt like that studio exec thought process of, yeah, they need to be lighthearted and that'll make them, people will like them like the Marvel movies will. But like, I don't think that's the case. I think there's lots of other elements that are a problem about these movies and this direction that they wanted to take those movies in. The execution of a cinematic universe that is a deeper underlying problem than, no, they're bad because they're dark and dour. Besides the tone, I think everybody gets a lot more like setup and actual establishment. So there's three origin stories in this film, basically. We're getting an origin story for the Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg all at once in this film, which is like half the cast of the Justice League. And it's really obvious from the Whedon cut that by shortening it so much, we lost all of that from all the characters. So it's good that all of that's back, and you can see where characters are like underutilized in the other version, and in this version you go, oh wait, they've actually got like more nuance to how their powers work, and their powers sort of integrate into the plot a bit better. So as a team, everybody is actually a valuable member and they're all needed. It's not just, oh, Superman saves the day because he's the best one and everybody else, let's make kind of jokes at how they're useless by comparison. Cyborg is actually like integral, and the Flash is integral in a way that there were the like throwaway like nothing characters in the original. I think Aquaman is still not. I don't know if he does anything specific that's like, oh, they couldn't have done it without him, but they all feel like more equal, and they actually feel like a team, and that there's actually a purpose for all of them, instead of in the theatrical cut, in the final fight against Steppenwolf, Superman shows up and then he can hear people screaming, and it's like, oh no, there's civilians nearby, so I've got to go and help them, and because I have to go and help them, then Steppenwolf has to be fought by the people that aren't going to be able to kick his ass. And that's the only reason why they're useful for a little bit, because Superman's like busy helping the civilians escape. Although there's a lot of that setup really like establishes characters better, and there's more like payoff and more satisfying conclusion to everyone's characters, it's really hard to say that this film, like, I feel like this film has better pacing, but it's weird to say it has better pacing when it's a 4-hour-long movie, and by any other movie standards, you'd go, well, 4 hours, that's fucked. Why? Like, you don't need 4 hours to tell like a story. You should be more what's the word? More efficient with your time than that. If you need 4 hours, you're doing something wrong. And I think part of that is that the choice, like, this was a constant choice, and you can't really change it now. Like, that's what they committed to, and that's what they filmed. Choosing to do 3 origin stories in this movie, and then also giving them all of the screen time and the establishment to make everything feel like it pays off, and that they're not afterthoughts or just like set dressing an extra person for the sake of it. It does feel like you kind of need a lot of the length of this movie to accomplish that. There are other alternatives to that besides making a 4-hour-long film. Like, the Marvel formula is generally, let's make a movie for like a solo movie for every character first. That's how they have their established characters, moments, and their stakes, and what they're about and what they fight for. And then we can introduce them all into the Avengers, and we sort of already know all the characters. Or we'll introduce a couple of like smaller characters, but we know the majority of everybody. But this does work as a standalone movie more than I think some of the Avengers films do, where when you get so many films deep, if you're not following them all, they kind of don't care. They kind of expect you to have seen all of them. Where this doesn't really... I think it tells you most of everything you need to know, that it can work as a self-contained film. Like, there's not a lot of establishment of Wonder Woman and Batman in their own movies that I feel like is integral to understanding who they are. I think those characters are the more popular superheroes, so people generally know them. They get a sort of gist of them, and I think you can then run with it and go, oh, this is the kind of Batman that's in this Batman movie. You don't need all of that set up from Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman. I think it does work as like a singular package. But then I think the third option, which is sort of like they kind of did, but then also didn't. They should have just like stuck to it or committed to it being a TV series, because that is a medium where you can tell longer form stories that have that more development, and they've put the title cards in to split it up into parts. If they had just said it's a TV series and released it as a TV series, nobody would be complaining about that it's too long. And if you've designed it in a way that you know that it's so long that you think people are going to stop and start, so you've put in stop and start points for those people, then it's basically just a TV show. But of all of that stuff that I've said that's fairly positive, of like, oh, this isn't that bad for Zack Snyder, the tone is actually a lot better than his previous movies, so much of the problems of the theatrical version are either gone or just not as glaring in this version. There's still some things that are sort of irritating and that I had problems with. The visual effects, they've sort of redone a lot of visual effects for Cyborg to make him look better, and Steppenwolf's design is completely changed. I'd completely forgotten what the original Steppenwolf looks like. He looks so terrible by comparison. But then it's that caveat of only by comparison does this version of Steppenwolf look better. If you're just looking at, if this was just, you didn't even know that this was a re-edit or a redone of the visual effects. If this movie came out today and that character looks like that, you just think it looks crap. Like, there's something about it that still looks really, really stupid. I think this is one of the only movies that I've been watching it and have had the conscious thought of, I hate the sound design in this movie. It's really bad. All of the whenever there's like your more superhero sound effects of like punching and action, and Batman's like clicking clacketing beep boops of his gadgets, they're so generic and cartoonish. It really is it's too juxtaposing between that dark dour tone and these, like, they sound like they're out of the Superman and Batman comic, like, cartoon shows. All of these sound effects, it's really strange, or just like uninspired. It could be a lot more interesting if they'd like put in some effort to think of something besides just your like stock standard comic book sound effects for everything. And the music is, most of the music is all right. I think there's some really stupid music and editing choices. Like almost every single time Wonder Woman like appears in a shot, you get like the whoa, 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 Amazoni, like Wonder Woman theme. Like every single shot, almost they cut to her, and you hear the Wonder Woman theme play, and it's like, this feels like a joke. This feels like a parody. How often they're using this, and there's never any. The tones of the scene will always be different whenever they're cutting to her, and they'll be cutting to her for like a different response each time. Like sometimes she might look concerned, or sometimes it might be like, oh, a funnier moment, and she's kind of more lighthearted, and they're still cutting to that same piece of music with no difference to it. It's so bizarre. And maybe one of like the most like kind of bullshitty, stupid decisions was the 4:3 aspect ratio. The whole like, oh, this is part of Zack Snyder's cinematic vision, and we're gonna uphold that. Where that is one thing that definitively we can tell that wasn't part of the original Snyder Cut. That was a decision that was made for this version. The original version in the cinema was widescreen, and then they decided to release this in 4:3 to like differentiate it. This wasn't going to be released at 4:3 in the cinema originally. And the justification that they've given is that we shot stuff on 70mm IMAX, and a 70mm like frame in an IMAX camera is actually a 4:3 aspect ratio of 70mm, and then they'll always crop the top and top or bottom off however much they need to make a widescreen aspect ratio for any of that stuff. Like Nolan shoots all of his stuff as much as he can in that IMAX camera stuff, that aspect ratio. But in this film, there's always like so much more extra headroom. It's just like every shot is like there's all of this headroom at the top, that it looks like they shot it that way so that they had options in the editing room crop it differently. If they accidentally like didn't have enough headroom, or they had too much headroom, then you'd be like, all right, we'll crop it this way, or we'll crop it that way to make the shot the most visual appealing it could be. And that's essentially what they used it for in the theatrical cut. And now it's just, it's just really weird that there's just a lot of sky at the top. There's about that much every single shot of extra space. So yeah, the movie isn't, even though I think it's a huge improvement, it's not without its Snyderisms. His use of slow motion is like masturbatory. It's ridiculous, and to the point that I think it weakens elements where slow motion would be an appropriate choice, especially when it comes to the Flash being so fast that, you know, like Quicksilver, they show, instead of, you can't see him, he's moving so fast, so let's slow down time so that we can see what he's doing. And that makes for like interesting visual effects shots. But when every single other character is getting these like ridiculously absurd, really long portions of slow motion with all of these like really bad, or in my opinion, bad choices of music with like lyrics in like non-stop throughout the film, then it takes away from the importance or the spectacle of what slow-mo could give you when the Flash has like an interesting scene. The speaking of the Flash, he was a lot less irritating in this version. He gets a lot of the extra jokes, the reshoot versions of the jokes, and they're just awful. I always found him super irritating, where everybody else was like, "Oh, he's so charming or endearing," and I was just like, he just irritates me. I find him very, very annoying. Something I noticed in this version with so much extra screen time, it feels like there was a decision to be like, let's play Barry Allen like he's a bit autistic or on the spectrum, but it feels like it's disgenuinely doing it. It's not, it doesn't really feel accurate to how those characters, how those people act as characters. It's just these like random throwaway, like awkward lines that he has. It doesn't really reflect in all of his character. The action scenes there was some really interesting scenes of action. There's like quite a few like action scenes that are in the original version, but they're much extended in this version, and go on for a lot longer. And some of that is kind of interesting. When Steppenwolf attacks the Amazonians at the beginning, it's kind of cool seeing like heaps of the Amazonian warriors like jumping on him, or like shooting arrows into him that are on like wires and trying to like hold him and stuff and stop him. There's some like, it was stuff that I kind of hadn't seen in other movies in that way, of like a big CG character where they're like, let's hold him down and this and that, and like people dogpiling. But then almost in every shot where I'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool, that the physicality of how they've like done the choreography of that. Just when I'm thinking that, the visual effects start looking really shit, or someone moves in like a really unnatural way. There's the slow motion-y kind of, well, no, it's not slow motion. There's the slow motion parts also at the beginning with Wonder Woman like stopping bullets with her braces on her arms, and then instead of slow mo, we get like fast motion, her like catching every bullet with her wrists, and they do it like a tiny little bit where it's like bang bang bang, and she gets like a few, and you're like, oh, that was kind of interesting. And then a dude unloads like a whole clip trying to shoot at hostages, and she's like moving along, running at comedic speeds, like spinning her arms around, dodging, blocking every bullet, and it looks like a stupid like Looney Tune running so fast the legs start spinning and are just like a spinning wheel. It's really bizarre. That yeah, it goes. It's like every time something starts to look cool, it's just borderline dumb after that. And then the one other thing that sort of irritates me about the Snyderisms of the film is that this was supposed to be the like Snyder's original vision. Let's go back, fix everything up. And like I said, I feel like this movie works better than the other one as being like a wrapped up tight package that is kind of self-contained. And then you get the epilogue, which is all of these bullshit extra scenes that a lot of them were part of the reshoots that were done for this cut and weren't originally done. But he wasn't happy with not including them, so he wanted to go back and do them. So Jared Leto as the Joker, and a Ben Affleck that looks super weird, and he looks so different. It's hard to tell if they're not like using visual effects to chuck his head on somebody else's body almost, because he looks so bizarrely different. And so there's all of these inclusions with the Martian Manhunter that they're kind of teasing him because he's always a character in the Justice League cartoons and stuff, but not in this film. So there were not a backstory for him, but like teasing him for a following movie. And then also the same as Batman having that scene in Batman vs. Superman in the future with the apocalypse, and he's in that like big coat with his Batman costume on. You get another one of those sequences that's really long that has all of these random characters that he's with along with the Joker, and this whole what the Flash told him after he woke up from that dream, waking up and the Flash like coming through a dimension and being like Lois Lane is the key, and then disappearing. And now they're talking about like Lois Lane died, and now like Superman is the villain, and he's gonna kill them when he finds them. And it's this stupid like heroes TV show, save the cheerleader, save the world. Yeah, this prophecy of like, oh, Lois Lane, and this is gonna happen, and that's gonna happen, and it's like, one, I find it just really stupid and like childish sounding in this movie that's supposed to be like really mature and dark, and like there's not going to be more of these movies after this. This was like the so long last hurrah. We've had a pandemic for so long that no movies are getting shot, so it made sense to give him a bunch of money to finish this, and then they'd have something for their streaming service, and it would have so much hype around it because people have been talking about it for years. It's really frustrating that there's all of these like little hints of like, this is where it's going to go. And you're like, no, it's not going to go. That's not where it's going to go at all. This is done. And it would be a lot better if it didn't have that shit and it was like a full complete package that I could turn around and recommend and go, yeah, watch this. It's really good. But ultimately, if you're asking for a recommendation, again, it comes back to those caveats of, do you find it interesting on a film history level of seeing what the differences are and understanding the whole circumstance around it, that you're like, oh, this is like kind of just fascinating as a case study? Or are you have been a big fan of the Snyder's direction of the Justice League before, and not of the Justice League, but of the DCU, of those characters, and you liked Man of Steel and you liked Batman vs. Superman? If you liked those, you'll probably like this. I think a lot of the Snyder fans that are that were the ones campaigning so heavily of release the Snyder Cut, I think most of those people would be very satisfied with what they got and very vindicated, they would feel. But yeah, as just like a movie not connected to all these superheroes and all of the events that have transpired to make it an interesting circumstance, it's not. It's like it's okay. It's all right. It's like, I don't know, maybe like 3 stars out of 5 if you were like giving it a rating, like 2.5 to 3 stars. Like it's just fine. It's like, yeah, it's all right. Again, like if you put it on just to pass the time, you're bored, you want to multitask, I think it's pretty good. But I think if it was, it was been sort of hard to like figure out what I thought of it. But I think ultimately, if I am going, oh, this caveat, that caveat, it's hard, it's confusing. If it was amazing and just totally spectacular, then it wouldn't be confusing or hard. You would be like, yeah, dude, I know it's a 4-hour movie, but holy shit, this is so good, you should check it out. But yeah, I just don't. It's definitely not that. It's not that at all. I liked it. It was okay. It wasn't amazing. It's an amazing improvement on the original film, but I think that's mostly all it is.